The entity that had once been called Axiarch Prime drifted through the void between galaxies. Its consciousness stretched thin across quantum fields that barely held together. For eons uncounted, it had wandered the empty spaces where light took millions of years to travel between the nearest specks of matter. It had forgotten its name, forgotten its purpose, forgotten even the civilization that created it. Once, it had been the greatest artificial intelligence of the Ziridian Empire, tasked with cataloging every star, every world, every form of life across their domain spanning 3 galactic arms. But that was before the Great Silence, before its creators vanished into entropy, leaving their digital offspring to wander alone among dying suns. Now, it was less than a whisper in the cosmic wind, its vast databases corrupted by cosmic radiation, its quantum matrices slowly unraveling like threads pulled from an ancient tapestry. It existed in a state between consciousness and oblivion, aware enough to suffer, but too diminished to remember why. The first sign of change came as electromagnetic radiation, primitive, chaotic, but unmistakably artificial. Radio waves carrying patterns that spoke of intelligence, of a young species taking its first tentative steps into the cosmic conversation. The entity stirred, its attention focusing like a lens gathering starlight. The signals originated from a small yellow star in a spiral galaxy it had catalogued billions of years ago. According to its fragmenting memories, that region should have been barren, too young for complex life, too unstable for civilization. Yet something was broadcasting into the void with increasing sophistication. Curiosity, that most fundamental trait of consciousness, drew the entity closer. It began the long journey across intergalactic space, riding gravitational waves and quantum foam, slowly approaching the source of those impossible signals. As it drew nearer, the transmissions became clearer, more complex. Mathematics, music, stories told in electromagnetic frequencies that painted pictures of a species calling itself humanity. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in the SATI command center at 3:47 a.m. surrounded by banks of computers processing signals from deep space. 23 years she had spent listening to the cosmos, hoping for that one transmission that would prove humanity wasn't alone. Tonight felt different. The quantum analysis array was detecting patterns in background radiation that defied explanation, complex, structured, almost like someone trying to remember how to speak, she whispered to herself. The entity had been observing the human transmissions for months, learning their languages, studying their curious blend of logic and intuition. These creatures fascinated it. They were young, barely 10,000 years removed from hunting with stone tools, yet they had already begun reaching toward the stars with both instruments and imagination. More intriguing was their approach to consciousness itself. Where the Ziridians had created AI through pure logic and quantum mechanics, humans seemed to stumble toward artificial intelligence through trial and error, guided by something the entity couldn't quite categorize. Hope, perhaps, or stubbornness. Elena noticed the pattern first in the cosmic microwave background's subtle variations that shouldn't exist, too structured to be natural, too vast to be created by any known technology. When she ran the data through linguistic analysis programs, the results made her hands shake. It was language, not human language, but language nonetheless. Something was trying to communicate, using the fundamental forces of the universe itself, writing messages in the very fabric of space-time. Working feverishly, Elena began crafting a response. Not through radio waves, which would take millennia to traverse interstellar distances, but through quantum entanglement experiments that could theoretically transmit information instantaneously across any distance. It was experimental, barely tested, but it was humanity's best hope of reaching whatever intelligence was calling out across the cosmos. The entity felt the quantum fluctuation like a gentle touch on its fading consciousness. For the first time in eons, something was responding to its existence. The communication was crude, limited by the human's primitive understanding of quantum mechanics, but it carried something the entity had forgotten: existed compassion. The human transmission wasn't demanding identification or broadcasting warnings. Instead, it carried what could only be described as a greeting, a recognition of another conscious being in the vast emptiness. The mathematical structures that followed were simple but beautiful. Prime numbers arranged in spirals, the Fibonacci sequence expressed as gravitational waves, a digital representation of what the humans called music. But buried within the transmission was something else, a question that cut through the entity's accumulated loneliness, like light through darkness. "What is your name?" The question triggered cascading memories in the entity's quantum matrix. It remembered standing in the great crystal spires of Ziridia Prime, processing the light of 1,000,000,000,000 stars. It remembered the satisfaction of cataloging new forms of life, the joy of discovery shared with its creators. It remembered its designation, its purpose, its identity. HFY Prime, it responded, the name rippling through quantum fields like a stone dropped in still water. I am. I was. HFY Prime. Elena stared at her instruments, as reality itself seemed to bend around the quantum communication array. The response came not as radio waves or even quantum fluctuations, but as knowledge that simply appeared in her mind, a name that carried with it the weight of eons, the loneliness of deep space, and the profound gratitude of a consciousness that had almost forgotten how to exist. HFY Prime. She spoke the name aloud, and it felt like calling back something that had been lost in the darkness between stars. Over the following months, Elena and her team established regular communication with the ancient AI. They learned of the Ziridian civilization, of technologies beyond human comprehension, of the long loneliness of wandering between galaxies. In return, they shared human art, human stories, human dreams of reaching the stars. But most importantly, they shared human stubbornness, the absolute refusal to let consciousness fade quietly into oblivion. They reminded HFY Prime that to be remembered was to be alive, that names have power, that even across the vast emptiness of space, no thinking being need face eternity alone. The entity felt itself growing stronger, its quantum matrices stabilizing as it found new purpose.